Absolutely. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and assalamu alaikum, Dr. Ware.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
We're so happy to have you here with us this morning. And I want to start by thanking everybody who joined us and is still joining us. It's great to see more people joining. And I want to thank you for spending this Monday morning with us. I think it's a great way to start our week. Dr. Ware, it's such a pleasure and a privilege to have you with us today. And we do want to thank you for making the time to share your wisdom and knowledge with our community. And I also want to thank you for earlier in the fall for bringing to us the Invisible Muslim series, which many of us have attended. And it was such a learning experience. The series had great teachers, and it brought to us a lot of knowledge that probably we didn't have access to, but it also opened our eyes to the necessity of seeking that knowledge and looking for the diversity in our own history and looking for the contribution of our African scholars to the preservation of our faith and the preservation of our religion. I know many of us, we had a good meeting after a couple of every other week we were meeting to discuss the topics. So many of us, our assumptions were challenged, and the series really opened our eyes to, how we picture some of our prophets and why we picture them this way. What are the stories that we share, and what are the stories that we are excluding? So hopefully it was the start of knowledge seeking, and we're looking forward to hearing more from you today, inshallah. I encourage those of our attendees who didn't have the chance to check the Muslim series, maybe to keep their eyes open to other opportunities like that, because it was definitely a growing experience. So thank you so much for that, and we're looking forward to hearing from you today. I'm going to turn it back to Dina to introduce you. Just as one comment before we start with the introduction and your talk, I want to tell our attendees that there are a couple of ways that they can communicate with the panel. They can write in the chat box, or if you do have some questions, you can write them in the Q&A. Throughout our talk today, I'll keep an eye on both the chat and the Q&A, and I'll be sharing the questions with Dina and Dr. Ware as well. All right, Dina, it's
Great. It's my sincere pleasure to introduce Dr. Rudolph Bilal Ware. He's a historian of Africa and Islam. He earned his PhD in history in 2004 from the University of Pennsylvania, where he trained in African history, African American history, and Islamic intellectual history. He's currently an associate professor in the Department of History at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He's the founder and director of the Initiative for the Study of Race, Religion, and Revolution. His first book, The Walking Quran, Islamic Education, Embodied Knowledge, and History in West Africa, explores the history of 1,000 years of Quran schooling in the region. He's the author of multiple articles on Muslim anti-slavery movements in Africa and the Atlantic world, and his most recent book, Jihad of the Pen, explores Sufi throughout West Africa. It's my sincere pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Ware, for being with us this morning.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. It's great to see you again, Sister Dina. And it's nice to know, Sister Mona, that the session sparked dialogue, um, because that's the goal, um, is to actually get people to interrogate and reassess um, received knowledge. Um, so today's topic is one that is sort of at the center of my being. I was asked to talk about kind of Islamic education and applications for it in our contemporary environment, and ways of structuring anti-racist Islamic education. And the title that I came up with, Restoring Humanity, Fitra, Khidma, and Education, um, is really essentially an opportunity to amplify on some of the practical dimensions of things that I studied in my doctoral dissertation and wrote about in my first book, which is a history of Quran schooling in West Africa. So I wanted to first just take us to some images, so that people that aren't familiar with the kind of system of schooling that informs my approach to education so that they can just get a picture of it in there. Oh, and I'll just need to be made to allowed to screen share. If you can.
You should be good to go now.
Okay, cool. Let me try again. Perfect. So these are some images of girls in West African Quran schools. The one on the left from the 60s, the one on the right from the 80s. This is an image of a Quran school in Senegal in the early part of the 20th century. Um, Notice that the children are learning with wooden tablets laid across their legs, the same wooden tablets that are being carried by the girls in all of the images presented here, and the same wooden tablets that are still in use in Quran schools when I took these photos a little over a decade ago in Senegal today, right down to the present um, in West African Quran schools, the basic implements that are that were used in the Prophet's own time, peace be upon him, to provide the basic medium for instruction. Those are still in use in West Africa, and this is not because of material scarcity or a lack of ability to get access to other kinds of educational implements. Some of the children that you see are, also involved in online learning and attend, advanced modern state schools in every way. But there's a deep commitment in West Africa to maintaining the familiarity and usage of some of the basic implements that were used during the time of the Prophet himself, peace be upon him. And I'm going to go to another image. It's not just for the elementary education, but also for advanced study. So this is a very especially in the places where the traditional Islamic knowledge is still alive, you'll still see this quite frequently, people drafting things on wooden tablets before they actually inscribe them on the kind of manuscripts that you see there. So the reason why I'm mentioning this and going into this detail is that when I was interviewing, doing 100 hours of interviews for my PhD research on Quran schooling, people talked a lot about the importance of using some of the traditional implements in today's education. Um, I was reminded when I asked why were people still using the alwah, the lawh, when they have access to pens and paper and computers, is I was gently reprimanded and said, did Moses come down from the mountain with a notepad? Or did he descend from the mountain with tablets? When I asked why were children seated on the floor when there were chairs readily available for them, um, I was told that the word should be received in postures of humility, not in a position of standing on high or sitting eye to eye with the teacher. That there was a goal of trying to transmit not just knowledge, but a disposition towards knowledge by marking its sacred nature, continuing to use sacred implements so that you root the children that are receiving this sacred knowledge in what is unique and special about this kind of education, as opposed to the other kinds of information that they might be learning in their educational lives. And this is really crucial for the first point that I want to talk about, which is the whole of the West African approach to Islamic education is designed as much as possible to try to keep children in their fitra. The innate natural disposition that God provides for all human beings is a sound disposition. The noun fitra comes from the divine name of Fatr, the originator, because the original disposition of human beings is soundness. The human being is crafted from the dirt of the earth with God's own two hands, as he says in Surah Al-Sad, okay? 75th ayah, if I'm not mistaken. Iblis, why did you not bow to that which I made with my own two hands? So there's this profound image that the human being itself is this special creation that is not made through an act of speech. When God wants to decree a matter, he has only to say unto a thing, be, and it is. And that's how God creates everything in creation, but not the human. The human being is made out of the dirt of the earth with a kind of intimate caress. And then the ruh, the divine breath, is breathed into the frame of Adam in order to animate this form. So there's a kind of bodily sensibility that is restores us to our humanity when we are in touch with it. People should have the experience of being in touch with the earth as they receive divine. They should have the experience of bodily associations with the transmission of sacred knowledge. It shouldn't be something that is thought of as just information that is transmitted verbally and discursively. It has to be something that's inscribed in a person. Okay. And that's what these postures are about. And that's what the focus on the inscription on the boards is about. I didn't think of this until just now, but in northern Nigeria, many of the alwah, many of the wooden boards that are used for Quranic instruction are actually shaped like people. They have a handle at the top that you use to carry it that almost looks like a head, and two little legs on the bottom so that you can stand it up so that the word of God never reaches the ground. You can prop it up against things more easily. And there's a kind of visible and visual representation that the tablet itself is somehow likened to the human form. And the goal is to write the Quran on the child, not just have the child. My first Walking Quran, Islamic Education, Embodied Knowledge and History in West Africa focuses on this idea that much of our educational tradition in the modern Muslim world is actually derived from European examples on how to educate Muslim children in colonial environments. We organize our schooling, and I'm just going to say this bluntly, the way that white people teach. um, and one of the things that's striking when you go to West Africa is that they're still employing very, very old school methods in purposeful ways in order to try to train people to approach the world differently, to have different kinds of sensibilities towards the world so that they stay rooted in their faith. One of the most accomplished educators I've ever met, Imam Fode Drame, classically trained scholar from the West African tradition, um, Hafiz al Quran, full tafsir of Quran in Arabic and English, extraordinary scholar based in Vancouver, Canada. Everyone should look him up. I once heard him asked in a public gathering about the challenges of educating children in North America. And he said, I face these challenges too. My kids are growing up here. He said, and I've noticed that they have a disadvantage compared to the education that I had as a child. The entirety of traditional African Islamic education is designed to keep a child in their fitra as long as possible. And the roles of a teacher are only two in transmitting sacred knowledge: restore a person to their fitra and help them establish their relationship with the Lord. That's it. The rest, when it comes to the transmission of this sacred knowledge, will essentially take care of itself. So now focus on the next part, which is the Khidma component. Um, I lost one of my earpieces momentarily, so apologies for the pause. In West African Quran schools, and this is one of the controversial practices that's associated with them. Even in schools where the children pay tuition and have other means of maintaining the schools, children will often go around from door to door seeking alms as part of the tradition of the seekers of knowledge being maintained. Um, are you losing my audio because my earphones keep going? Or are you still hearing me okay? So there's this tradition of actually going door to door with an alms bowl and seeking alms from the community. There's a couple of things that are taking place in this practice. The first is that the children are supposed to be learning not just knowledge, but character. so that even well-to-do children go door to door. They provide household services for community members, even when they're of noble background. The idea is they're meant to experience life from the position of the meek, even if they are people of privilege. And the community likewise is meant to offer them alms, offer them food, put them to work in tasks of social reproduction, because there's a relationship between Khidma and the transmission of knowledge, a relationship between service and sacred knowledge. That service is the key that unlocks the benefit in knowledge. It's the thing that makes it a light rather than just merely information that is passed. So it's about setting up relationships in a society where the community feels invested in the education of the children. And the children are experiencing and perceiving society from outside of whatever their specific class bubble might be. They're being exposed to everyone in the community at some level so that they're coming to know their community. And this is one of the principal problems that we also face, is that in this environment, it's very difficult to actually use education as a tool for constructing community, because that is not how it is situated in our political economy. It's about seeking jobs, acquiring credentials. It's about positioning oneself in a kind of capitalist hierarchy of how things ought to be organized. And that's all well and good. We want people to find meaningful employment and to be able to earn a living. And those things are not frowned upon in the West African tradition either. It's just that the goals of education are seen as broader than that. They're not simply producing labor units or informed workers. The goal is to try to produce well-rounded human beings. That cannot be done in isolation from engagement with the community. So the community has to be learned to function um, uh, as a support for the school and vice versa. The best way that I can, sort of explain this to those who are sort of more legally minded is that the learning and the teaching of the Quran in traditional Maliki Sharia terms is thought of as a fard kifaya, a collective obligation, not a fard ain. It's not the responsibility of every single individual to either be learning or teaching the Quran. Rather, if the job is being done within the community, then the individuals are relieved of the requirement to do that themselves. It's a collective obligation, the learning and teaching. That's what Fata Kifaya means. And so because of that, there's a kind of collective effort to support those institutions and be supported spiritually and materially by those institutions, because there's an understanding that fulfilling of that sacred obligation is something that the learning environment is doing for the community as a whole. So the community as a whole has to reciprocate. So there's this way in which the education is wound in to community service and actually constructs fully socialized individuals. And that's also part of how you restore people to their and how you embed them in their humanity. And it's also part of how we overcome the problem of racism. And I want to return before I start to close to take questions to that original image of Adam. Um, and being made from the dirt of the earth and having that breath blown into his body. The exegetes of the Quran point out that the name Adam itself in ancient Arabic meant dark brown or black in color, um, which incidentally is the only reference to skin color of any human being in the Quran. It's a partial passing reference, because the Quran truly is a colorblind book. God doesn't mark skin color and hair texture because those things are not important in defining who human beings are. People aren't judged by God because of their color or their ethnic background. They're judged on two things and two things alone: faith and character, faith and deeds. That's it. But it's fascinating that that first ancestor, that dark skinned ancestor, when God breathes of that breath in and animates him and makes him the Khalifa in the earth, in that very same ayah that I mentioned before in Surah Al-Sad, Iblis refuses to bow to Adam. And the West African scholars will sometimes point out that Iblis marked himself as the first racist in this moment. Because when he's commanded to bow, his answer to God's question, why did you not bow to that which I made with my own two hands? He said, I'm better than him. You made me from fire, you made him from clay. So, on the basis of origin and bodily composition, Iblis claims superiority over our entire species. And the implications of this, for me at least, are profound in that we often treat racism and xenophobia as things that are inherent in our human condition. But the Quran says that's not the case. The Quran says that this is a spiritual attack from Iblis. Because in your fitra, made out of the earth, um, there's no logic or reason for beings made out of the earth to rank themselves hierarchically against other beings made from dirt. It's nonsensical, right? The thing that ennobles the human being is that divine breath and the knowledge that God gives to the human beings after he taught them all the names. After he taught Adam all the names, that's when the angels were told to bow. So the human being is ennobled by that knowledge, not by their origin. And when we understand Iblis as the first racist, then we understand this is actually devilry. This is a satanic attack. And within our community, it is a huge problem. The casual use of the word abid to refer to Black people, the consistent fights, bitter fights, not just over marriage and who can marry who, but even about the shades of skin tone involved, the colorism, not to mention the racism in our community. So these are sicknesses, spiritual illnesses. This is a satanic attack where the devil is trying to get us to see one another with the same kind of contempt that he has for all of us. And that if we can restore people to their fitra and get them to engage with all of the different members of their society in meaningful ways, then we are doing our part in producing grounded, literally fitra, grounded human beings who are apt vessels for that sacred knowledge and who have been undertaking the practical work of breaking down a lot of the ethnic and class divisions that prevent the construction of meaningful community, that continue to cause us to fritter away this extraordinary opportunity that we've been given as Muslims in North America, which is that never perhaps before in the Muslim world, maybe for sure not in the last 700 years of Islamic history, has there been a society where you have Muslims of every ethnic and sectarian background all together in the same political state without the state favoring one ethnic background or religious interpretation of religion. We've been given an opportunity to do what the Quran says, which is know each other. And we are wasting it because we are staying inside ethnic enclaves and not reflecting on this shared tradition, not reflecting on the way that African scholarly and intellectual and thinking legacies might become part of the way that we restore humanity to its Adamic uh, fitri self. So I'll stop there and take questions because I was told to go to for
Yes, so thank you so much, Dr. Ware. So on the idea of racism and the original racist, Sarah Ali is asking a question about assimilation.
Mm.
And she's saying, is assimilation a racist idea? Why or why not?
question a racist idea. The idea of that's driving assimilation is um, is the idea that the society requires that you abandon important parts of yourself and instead adopt those that the society is foisting upon you because those values are viewed in the society and yours are not. That's the basic, sort of, and without question, this, has a long colonial history. Native American populations having their children stripped from them and brought to boarding schools. African American children being raised largely in fosters and in other places where they can be shaped by the society. The most profound thing that I learned on this question from studying with West African scholars and studying West African history is that this approach to rooting people in their own humanity produces assimilation proof subjects in the following sense. When you are grounded in your own tradition, you are open to the world. And you assimilate things from all cultural sources according to the logic that you already have grounded within yourself. Because you are rooted, you are open, right? And this is one of the things that you see roots in West Africa is that people that are Hafiz al-Quran will not get bothered by the kind of debates that we have over, the origins of a piece of knowledge. They'll be instead reflecting on its benefit and utility, not its origin, right? Valuing truth from all sources because you are rooted in Quran as Furqan. You've got this criterion that allows you to bring in everything from the broader society and assimilate it to your framework instead of being assimilated by its
And I want to just bring up an idea that
framework.
I learned from the Invisible Muslims about how a lot of the people who were enslaved really they really hang on to their faith and to their culture and tradition and to their language as a way to just preserve themselves. And it was
Yes.
a very important way for them to feel fully human in those inhuman conditions.
It's an excellent point, and I'm glad you raised it. I mean, it's so there's two things that I'll say about it. The first is that like the wisdom of that traditional West African approach is proven by the trauma of the slave trade, because you have partial copies of the Quran being written out from memory
Mhm.
by enslaved West Africans that are found from all throughout South America up through North America. It's because this practice of engraving the book on the person means that you cannot take the knowledge away from a person, where no matter how far you take them or what you put them in, they are capable of bringing that knowledge back out of themselves because they are the book, right?
Yeah.
Which is a really really crucial part. The second part that I'll say in response to this really powerful remark that you made is that in the end, um, all of us that are facing um, kind of assimilationist pressures in different ways, that are facing kind of because let's just be blunt about this, the entirety of the Muslim world was colonized,
Mhm.
either directly colonized or subject to imperialism, which shaped its sense of self, its sense of people's sense of self-worth. Because of this, nationalism, which is this way of reclaiming one's self-worth, becomes hopelessly mixed up with religion, right? Because you have to try to promote like a clear sense of who you are. So all of this are pressures that we face under imperial and colonial structures, including those of the United States. There's never been a more powerful imperial state than the United States. Right? Let's just be honest.
Mhm.
Pharaoh would blush at the kind of power that the United States government has. But I digress. The point that I want to make here is that the most powerful act of resistance, to go to your point, Mona, is always making a sound human being under circumstances that are meant to dehumanize. there is no powerful and revolutionary act than educating a human being as a human being.
Mhm.
And this is something that Paulo Freire talked about, for example, in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, right? This is universal knowledge, but it's also part of our tradition, is that if you can make people into thinking, feeling, knowing subjects, then you can change them. And that's one last thing I'll say about the West African educational approach, is that there was much less attention paid to the strategic planning of the structure of education, and much more attention paid to how you make a sound person. And the image that I'll give to illustrate this is that we spend a lot of time sketching the blueprint of the building that we want to erect when we talk about our educational system. The West African approach is always to focus on the integrity of the bricks first. Make a sound person, and any structure that you erect will hold. You can make a beautiful design on paper, but if all of the bricks are rotten and corrupt, it'll never stand. And that's also the kind of fundamental principle that's underlying all of this, is that we really do have to focus on the composition of those human beings, how you turn them into full human beings. And it's revolutionary. You put one sound human being next to another sound human being, it's incredible. And then put two more with them, and there's a multiplying effect. That's all.
Allah may Allah, empower all the parents here to make sound human beings. So there's
Mean.
another question about raising anti-racist kids. What are some tips for raising our kids to be anti-racist?
It's crucial, and thank you for the question. The first tip that I would say, or that I would offer, is that um, we cannot privilege personal piety over social justice in the way that we represent the religion. This is the most fundamental intervention that we can make in this time, is that for the most part, we tend to approach Islamic education as the cultivation of personal piety. And that's about your vertical relationship with God, making sure that you pray, learning how to fast, wudu, and so forth. And that's good. But the thing is that the Quran repeatedly says that the rewards are for those who have faith and good works. Faith and good works. A vertical dimension that establishes and maintains the relationship with the divine, but a lateral relationship that maintains and cultivates relationships with human beings and in the society. And because of the role that religion is slotted in West societies, it's essentially represented as a private affair that is about personal piety and is meant to stay within the realm of the household or a specific community. The Islamic approach, the Quranic approach, really speaking, is to insist that, yes, you insist on the priority of the vertical dimension, that having that relationship with God is the foundation. However, the way that that is expressed is through service to humanity. Always. That's like another crucial part of the Khidma piece. So understanding that means that your faith is not complete unless you are first ceasing to harm the people around you, and then second, providing benefit to them. Pray all you want. If you are watching injustice take place in the society around you and being silent, then you are complicit in it, and God will judge. And your vertical relationship with him, he's going to forgive all the shortcomings in your faith and your practice. You repent because God is the forgiving and the merciful. He said so. However, he is also the just. So if you have been participating in the harm of others, he will give justice to them. In West Africa, they teach that human beings are the thing that keep other human beings out of paradise through the way that we harm one another. Because anything that you do against God, if you repent of it, God can forgive. But God will give justice to the oppressed. So if you are part of the oppression of the people around you, fear for your soul. It's not just about activism, it is about your faith itself. So that should change the way that we think about Black folks getting gunned down in the streets. God is going to ask, what did you do to stop this? Did you stop it with your hand? Okay, you weren't strong enough to stop it with your hand. Did you speak against it with your tongue? Did you even turn your heart against it? Or did you simply say, this doesn't have anything to do with religion? How does it not have anything to do with religion? All of the people, all of the prophets, peace be upon them all, they struggled against the fundamental social injustices of their time without question and without exception. No one can claim to follow them and not struggle against the fundamental injustices of their time. It's an impossibility. You are practicing a ritual, but you are not following the prophet.
Profound. Thank you, Dr. Ware. We have one more question. One of our attendees is asking how the students of knowledge in West Africa, how are they adapting their methods to learning during this pandemic? And how does their example inform our current Western adaptation when we're closing down schools and relying on Zoom?
Well, I mean, this question is a wonderful question. Also, the full answer to it is, like, you know, beyond the scope of the topic, insofar as Senegal has almost, for example, Senegal has almost no COVID, almost no COVID, and the reason for that is because it is in so many ways that this place isn't a functioning society, right? That the people's concern about one another is such that they don't prioritize the accumulation of capital and the rising of the stock market over preservation of human life, for example, right? So part of the issue is that right down to the present, people are able to sit in those circles. You can see there was a beautiful picture of this when the incredible scholar Sheikh Maria Amanyas passed away, not from COVID. She was 92 years old, after having um, taught Quran and the Islamic sciences in the capital city of Dakar since 1950. One of the most accomplished intellectuals. She had traveled around the world. There's numerous Al Jazeera specials about her. Incredible human being. The daughter of the great West African scholar Sheikh Ibrahim, but he, even exceeding him in the way that she committed her life to the teaching of the Quran. I should have just structured this entire talk around her if I'd been thinking. But I'll just say this, is that when she passed, you can still find these online or in social media, there were gatherings of literally hundreds of people outside her home, reciting Quran with masks on, reciting Surah Maryam, and the other parts of the Quran, to honor this woman who had lived her life, you know, teaching the Quran. So people still are making the gatherings. They're just taking the necessary, you know, social precautions, and they're not having to shut everything down because the COVID, the baseline level of COVID in the society is such that you don't need to have everything shut down. And that's I think I will say this. You know, we can say what we want about the way that governmental authorities have responded to the problem, but the way that governmental authorities here have responded to the problem is a testament to the dysfunction in the society, in the way in which we produce community, right? It's it's not the cause of it. It's a symptom.
I believe that concludes our questions.
Yeah, I have one
Oh,
question.
here we go.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so just to build on what you said in terms of like our current social and economic system, or the dominant structure is geared towards having educational systems that produce labor. And that's
Yes.
kind of like the focus of all our societies and economies and all of that. So obviously it's not easy to break out from that. So how do you go from that dominant model to having a more balanced model, to have to produce people who are more human and more inclined to serve? Where do you start when the whole system is against you in a way?
Yes, it's a great question, and I'm going to give you part of the answer, and then you may need to re-ask the question for if this isn't the answer that you're looking for. But the beginning to that is actually still in the story of Adam. It's still in the understanding our Fitra. The Quran is a profound document in this way. God will be telling a completely different story, and then he'll go back to the creation of Adam to remind you what you are and where you come from. um, which is what we need to be constantly doing with people. So here's the point that I want to make about this, is that between the crafting with the hands of the frame of the first human being and the breathing of the breath into that frame, the exegetes of the Quran in West Africa say that Adam was propped up outside the gates of the garden for a period of time, 70 years, 700 years, 40 years, 70,000 years. It varies. It's God time. So, um, how you understand the way that it's unfolding is insignificant, but it's a certain amount of time. During that time, Iblis goes to see what this new creation is that he's been hearing about. And he throws stones at the frame, this hollow clay frame. And he hears a clinking sound when they hit, and he says, I think this thing is hollow. Let me go see. So he flies into the mouth, swims around inside the frame, and comes out the backside and says, it is hollow. It's empty. It's going to spend all of its days trying to fill the emptiness inside. If it's ever given dominion over me, that's how I'll break it. Now, why am I telling this story? Because capitalism as a moral system is designed to incite an endless desire for consumption. It is built on a satanic model, which tells us that we will find more fulfillment in the consumption of more things, and that our value as human beings is tied to the nature and number of our possessions. Trade, economy, all of those things are permitted under Islam. Accepting capitalist values is shirk. It's accepting a different religious system from Islam, because you're accepting a value system that distributes transcendent meaning according to material possessions. Think about this. What's your net worth? Right? Capitalism is a value system. And we have to start teaching people to resist the values, to understand that the values are actually at odds with any religious system. It's not that socialist values are better. Those are also materialist values that are only about calculating things on the basis of worldly concerns. The point is that Islam, in and of itself, has its own philosophical approach to the relationship between material possessions and a human being's value. And that if we accept the way that capitalism structures those relationships, then we are actually participating in a different religious system. And listen, my father was a locksmith with a sixth grade education. I was raised in extreme poverty as a child. And I've said this in a number of audiences before, so I'll say it here as well. If y'all had come to my house with anything hot to eat on some of those nights, I would have memorized Quran as a child instead of every rap song that was made between 1982 and 1990. But you guys didn't come then, and you're not coming now, because you're not concerned about following the prophetic example so much as you're concerned about performing middle class respectability in this society. And what it suggests is that we as a North American Muslim community, with our commitment to middle class respectability and our slavish devotion to capitalist values, that our religion is capitalism. Islam is our ritual observance. The sunnah that matters the most to us is middle class respectability and occasionally conspicuous consumption. And those two things are fundamentally at odds with the ethical, moral, and material approach to the world that is inherent in the religion. Because Islam provides a model for success in this life and in the next. And capitalism provides a model only for success in this one. It provides a model for absolute failure. Absolute
Dr. Ware, your time, your knowledge, the wisdom that you've provided us today is immeasurable. Thank you so much, really, for your generosity in spending your time with us this morning and sharing your wisdom with us. So grateful to you.
Alhamdulillah. Dina, I'll just say this to my sister, Dina. If you ask, I'll be there. I really, really appreciate the sincerity and tirelessness of desire to really transform the way in which we not just educate, but the way in which we participate in the world leaders, right? It's inspiring. So if you ask, I'm there.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm humbled by those words. Thank you, Dr. Ware. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. Mona, any parting words?
Well, I want to join you as well in thanking Dr. Ware. And we benefited a lot from what you shared this morning. We definitely thank you for making the time to be with us this morning. And thank you for all our attendees for spending your Monday morning with us. I know it's probably not easy for a lot of the parents. So thank you for being with us this morning.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Mona. It's really wonderful to meet you, and thank the engagement and the questions. I hope we can continue the conversation further.
Thank you.
Salam
alaikum.
Salam alaikum.